Hello, my friends, and welcome to an all brand new episode of Discourse in Magic. This is episode 147 with the one and only Jay Sankey. If you don't know who Jay Sankey is, lift that rock up from over your head and just type it into Google, and you will soon find that he is one of the most prolific magic creators around. He has created more magic than anyone on the planet. He's also created magic for some of the best, like David Copperfield and Chris Angel, and he's just incredibly wise and talented. He's got one of the best YouTube channels around for learning magic and just a real creative powerhouse. We talk about creating magic, copywriting, advertising, and how all of those things sort of overlap in magic and what you can do to be more creative and what you can do to distill a little bit more of you in your magic. I hope that you love the episode. I know that I did. Here is episode 147 with Jay Sankey. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah, and we are here with a very special guest. This is a Toronto magician, but most importantly, he's a YouTuber and a prolific creator in magic. And I'm super excited to chat with him about creating magic and sharing magic, which he is probably the best in the world at doing. We are here with the one and only Jay Sankey. How are you?
I'm good. I'm imagining applause in my head. It's a big crowd, so thank you.
I'm clapping. It's awesome, and it's very, very exciting to finally chat with you. Let's start at the very beginning of all of it. How did you get started in magic?
I got started in magic in a laundromat involving my father and several other men. No, I got started in magic when my grandmother gave me a magic set for my 11th birthday. What made the story a little different than a bunch of magicians, I think, though, is that she had just come back from a little bit of a European tour. It's not like it was anything too fancy, but so the kit she gave me, actually, the instructions were in German.
Why did I have a feeling that from the get-go you were creating?
Yeah, I don't know. I imagine just a weird little kid, of course, growing up on a sheep and pig farm, isolated in Ontario here, not a lot of people around and no magic shops, that's for sure. And so I had this magic set with a whole bunch of plastic props and a couple of illustrations I tried to follow, and the rest was just, I kind of had to try to, I wouldn't say start creating my own tricks. That's a little overblown, but I certainly, I was left a fair bit on my own to try to figure out some of this stuff.
That's incredible. And I've found so many times when asking people about their origins in magic, magicians always give me flack for answering that question because they're like, it's always a magic set. But I always find a little bit in there which sort of makes clear a lot about the development, which, it's so obvious listening to how much you create now that you were the guy looking at the props going like, what do these do? Or what do I do with this? And not the one reading the instructions and doing exactly what it says. So that's illuminating. I always joke about magic that there's the thing that gets people into magic, then there's the thing that keeps people into magic. So what after one magic set kept this going? Why did you continue doing magic?
Yeah, and I love the two part to that question. It's really it's interesting. First, I wasn't very good at it, and my personality. There's a whole bunch of things I try, and if I'm not good at them, okay. But then there's these things that come along every now and then. Billiards, shooting pool was one of them, where I wasn't very good, and I just quote unquote had to become better. So something about that pulled me in that I wasn't very good at first, and then I wanted to become better. I also think, I got the same story so many other people do to get into magic, which is that magic was a role, the magician, traditionally a very two-dimensional, very tragically limited role, what the magician is. And it was some way for me to stand up and show my awkward self without ever having to reveal anything about myself. And this is what magic does more than most of the other arts. It allows you to do that. So I think as a middle child, I think that really fit that for me, that aspect of it, being able to perform without risk, because the lay audiences, tragically, to this day, are still more than happy to accept the cardboard cutout of the so-called magician. So I think that was a fit for me, and I stuck with it. Yeah, I remember showing my father Scotch and soda, this coin trick, and screwing it up really badly. And running out of the room crying and emotional scars, and hearing my mother say from washing the dishes in the kitchen, sort of saying, "Oh, Lloyd," to my father, because apparently it was all his fault. And I've always been, so I mean, all these kinds of emotions around it, and it's fit for me as a personality, I think, is what pulled me in, certainly initially, and kept me there for a long time.
And part of it, as a youngster learning magic that I've always found is that it allows you to work with or talk to or interact with people that are like a little bit older than you. You know, it feels like you have this whole new maturity of you that you can perform, you know, but you have something in common or something to show someone who's 30 years old and not, you know, you're just a 12-year-old or 8-year-old or whatever.
That's a beautiful point. That's a beautiful point. Yeah, and to hopefully not to put too fine a point on it, you know something they don't know.
Exactly.
And
That's exactly
you
right.
can demonstrate that knowledge in 30 seconds. And that as young people at that age, you know, because when you're 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, you really don't have a sense of how big the world is and how little
Mm.
you really know. And then at some point between then and when you're 18, you start to realize, man, it's huge. I know nothing. It's a huge world. And so this can be magic, can be the ideal buffer.
Just maybe I missed it, but how old did you say you were when you got that magic set?
11, Your Honor.
11. So talk to me about it. So you continued doing it. You enjoyed showing your family and I assume your friends at school and things like that. And then how did it develop into a career? Like when did you
Yeah.
choose to take this so seriously?
I got into it by the age I was maybe 15. I was doing some kids' birthday parties and things. And this is out in the rural sticks. So I literally, there was down the road was a guy who had some dwarf rabbits. So I would literally like rent a rabbit for the weekend kind of thing, then get it back to him. And I was doing kids' birthday parties. I was working in church basements. I did Christmas shows and where you go on just before or after Santa Claus and all this stuff. And I had all the usual experiences people do. I was using a dove pan at one point and didn't have the bunny that weekend, so tried it with a little kitten, and then the kitten was starting to cry before the reveal and hopping around on the card table, and then the lighter fluid in the pan, but the gimmick under the lid wasn't working, so I was holding the pan way too long than I ever had before in the open palm, and all of a sudden I basically ended up chucking a pot of fire and a live kitten into the first couple of rows at a church thing. And it was, I almost, to see the minister stomp out your magic prop. That's the kind of stuff that really puts you on the road to a career, or more of a careen, actually, more of a careen. So I was doing that stuff. And then I went down to Tannen's magic camp when I was about maybe 16 or so. The Tannen's, as we know, Tannen's Magic, very popular in New York City, and one of the original really big ass magic stores. They had a magic camp, and I went down there, and there were counselors and this. And at the end of the week, there was a competition. You worked towards that. So I was working on my close-up, a lot of coin stuff, and I can still remember the moment when maybe that morning before they announced the winners of the close-up show, and there were probably a total of 16 people in the close-up show, where the counselor, he looked at me and pointed. He did an amazing retention pass, I gotta say, and pointed at me and didn't say anything. And so my mind said, no. Imagine. Don't dare to believe. Don't dare to hope. Maybe. I don't know. No, he probably meant something else. Maybe. And then when they announced my name and they gave away the Stars of Magic and the Slidini books, when I turned out I'd won the close-up show, I believe my fate was sealed.
That'll do it.
That'll
That'll
do
do
it.
it. Yeah, winning a competition like that, that'll do it. And also, you know, one of the things to just put in perspective, that was probably the first time where it went from being like you, the only magician, or like, you know, 2 magicians or 4 magicians or whatever, to just being absolutely engulfed in magic, magicians, competition. Like, I'm sure that was just like the first time that you had ever been so deep in it and realized, you know, you were talking earlier about, you know, knowing how little we know. Sort of one of those moments about magic, I'm sure. Going
Oh
to
yeah,
Tannen's.
it definitely had the rise of the Magi. It totally had. Yeah, it was. You know, you've been in those magic conventions and things, and maybe not now as much, but when you're younger, you barely sleep. It's a fascinating world, and you know, you're literally shaking with the knowledge and the excitement of this newfound, really amazing thing. And like you said, all of a sudden you go from this beautiful connection between you and a deck of cards or something to all of a sudden there's this beautiful connection between you and this community of like-minded freaks.
One of the things that came up for me when I was at Sorcerer Safari, the other magic camp, which is no longer around, but one of the things that was so interesting to me is that was the first time I remember getting on the bus, going up to camp and sitting there, and like the girl on my right is like a cage full of doves, and the guy behind me is shuffling cards, and in front of me doing coin tricks. And I realized, you know, like you were saying earlier, that as a youngster, you can put the little badge on that says magician, and now you've got some sort of identity. I realized sitting on that bus that magician was not enough, because they were all magician, and I realized that I wasn't special anymore by being a magician. I was just one of them. So that was one of the times for me that I had to be like, what, I have to be more than a magician, right? And you start to maybe find your place in magic or as a performer, as an entertainer, because you're not the magician, you're a magician.
That's a beautiful, man. I've never heard anybody put it like that. It's a beautiful distinction. Yeah, that's a really cool thing. The paradox of finding a community is that profound sense of connection with something larger than yourself. But then how does that reflect on your place within the tribe? Cool.
And it happens all the time. Like people go to, let's say, university for like acting because they were the best actor in their school. And they go and they're in a class full of all of the best actors in their school. And now they're just an average actor for their class, right?
Right.
So it happens in everything, but it's fun to see it happen in magic. Let's talk a little bit more about how that sort of continued. So you were hooked on magic after winning a competition at Tannins. That's when you knew that you were in for it for sure. What direction did you go in? I know that you did a lot of performing before you started churning out magic at a rate no one's ever seen before. So talk a little bit about that.
Right, the churning as a cry for help. I was definitely at that point. So now I'm in my late teens and getting into the 20s. I'm at University of Toronto studying psychology and philosophy there. Some film stuff as well.
And was that, just to interject, were you studying that to help your magic, or were you studying that because you thought you were going to do something else?
I studied that because I was sure I was going to go into advertising. I wanted to know more about writing ad copy and how to influence the way people see things. And at that point, I was very deep into magic, but I didn't think I'd be doing it for the rest of my life. I was I had a lot of passion for the advertising community and print ads and billboards and radio spots and all that stuff. And I eventually even worked here in Toronto at a place called Franklin Dallas, a very small company up in Richmond Hill. I worked there in advertising as a copywriter for a couple of years. It was great experience, so good. But that's probably more why I did focused on the psychology and the philosophy. I also was raised in a liberal arts home. You know, my father's an architect, my mom a landscape architect, and they really encouraged me to, you know, back then, of course, it wasn't about there was more of a sense of you didn't go to university to find a job once. It was more of an, you know, I was lucky enough to be able to take a couple of years to study stuff that interested me. But like I said, there was advertising in my mind at that point. But I was also started to travel because Richard Kaufman had very kindly, he saw something in what I sent him some videos down to New York City, some early coin work of mine. And he very graciously got right back to me and said, that I don't even understand what you're doing. Like that stuff was back then, I guess some of the stuff I was doing with coins was pretty off to the left there. And he found it, you know, he really deceived him. So he was excited and we started working on, I published some stuff in an early magazine of his, and then he did my first book. I was also performing a lot in restaurants, a lot of restaurants, some trade show work, but a lot of restaurants, 2 or 3, sometimes 4 nights a week down to Oakville here in Toronto, whatever. I was performing a lot in restaurants and close-up magic and a little bit of street magic, just enough to know, wow, that's really hard, street magic. Yeah. So that's what I was doing then in the sort of the early 20s.
So let's talk a little bit about the restaurant magic. So I think one thing that a lot of people are always hooked on is like, how do you get a restaurant magic job? Like it always feels so, you know, I go to lots of restaurants and there are so rarely magicians there. So it feels like it's impossible to get somebody who runs a restaurant to pay you to work in restaurants. So what kind of advice can you give to somebody who's like, I love close-up magic, I do close-up magic, restaurants seem perfect. How do I get into multiple restaurants? How do I get into one restaurant, let alone multiple?
Well, that's a whole thing. I'd be happy to. I'll go on a bit, and you just stop me at some point. But I'll try to keep it brief.
Maybe a few points of advice.
Yeah, well, there's 2 ways to go that, in my experience. There's the one you go corporate, and you find the right person, you find the business manager, whatever, and you you drop off a package. It has to be really impressive, great photos, some nice quotes, and from the get-go, from the first word, first sentence, it's all about promoting a cool promotion opportunity for the restaurant to do some live performing. Of course, you give you can turn over tables faster. You can support the staff when they're in quote unquote, when they're in the weeds. You use the languaging of the restaurant industry and let them understand that there are a number of really strong benefits, and the ROI for what it's going to cost and what you can do, and particularly how you can make the restaurant stand out. And you've got some local media connections at the newspaper or the breakfast television. You can bring those in too. Now you're talking his or her language. It's obviously not about the fact that you are a good magician, please. So you go marketing or business approach. Or the other one I used to do that I had some good success with is you go in when it's busy with some friends, and you show your friends some tricks, and you stand up and you show the table beside you, and you're showing a few things to 3 or 4 tables, and you're staying out of the way of the staff. You're
Mm-hmm.
choosing your moments, and maybe you call before and which night is the manager going to be in, and this and that,
Mm-hmm.
and you try to parlay a bit of a live performance into enough interest. If you're good at what you do and you're personable, and they have some promotion budget. If they don't, they don't. If they do,
Mm-hmm.
then it's really just about, as it is with magic, we know most of the time, it's about somehow getting around all the reasons to say no to the corny,
Lots.
cheesy,
Right.
ego-oriented magicians. If you can,
Yeah.
so those are the two approaches: the live performance or a straight business pitch done through a package and then a meeting. Those are my 2 pieces of advice.
There's 2 comments that I want to put on both of those things.
Mm,
The first is I love right out the gate when you were talking about the more corporate approach, talking about them and how it
exactly.
benefits them.
Key.
I'm always trying to help magicians with some of those aspects, like how to send a good email or what to put on your website and different things like that. And I'm always blown away with the amount of me, I, me, my, I. My magic has been so amazing that they love it from all the me. I love it and they love it. Versus saying like, wow, your guests at your restaurant and make sure they're talking about it for not days after, but weeks after. Like I didn't even mention me. Right. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight there is that it's about them. So if you're approaching for anything, a restaurant, any type of gig, they have to think that the ROI of bringing you in, the return on investment, for anybody that doesn't know what that is going to be higher. It's going to be worth bringing you in. They're not doing you a favor. They're bringing you in. So I really like that. And the second, which is something that you didn't say, but you sort of mentioned it without mentioning it, is you said, some restaurants will have a budget, some will not. Sometimes they will hire you, sometimes they will not. And one of the things that is so important is that if you want to go do restaurant magic and you go, whatever it is, you go with your friends on a really busy night and you perform for a bunch of tables and the manager doesn't come over and say hi, or he says hi, but says, hey, stop doing tricks at the table.
Exactly.
Then you say, okay, no problem. And you say, thanks. Here's my card if you're interested. And you don't keep bothering that restaurant. You move on to the next one or whatever. And like all marketing or advertising, whatever, you're collecting no's just as much as you're collecting yeses.
Oh yeah, many more no's. If my fan base watched a 60-second video of all my so-called failures in so many different industries, way outside of magic, I don't know what they think. But as you and I, am sure, are both experienced enough to know that many of the most successful in the people in the world have experimented far more and swung their bats at far more balls than most people,
Mm-hmm.
and making it about them is absolutely at the core of everything I do in magic and outside of magic. You got to make it always about them. As a middle child, I've always been very aware of the difference between wanting to, quote unquote, express myself versus communicate with others. And this is something that
Mm-hmm.
artists in general, magicians in particular, maybe, it's all communication. It's all about engagement and connection and giving them a reason to watch for another second. And I try not to waste my time. It took me years to learn. If I'm at a walk around gig, if I go up to a group of people and I say, hey, how you doing? My name's Jay. I'm actually a magician. That's right, a magician. I've been asked to come here. I'm not an outpatient. I show everybody a trick. As soon as somebody says, oh, thank you so not much, we're not interested, or, oh, is it white or black magic? I mean, we've got all these things. The first thing I always do is give a very sincere smile and I say, thank you so much. Last thing I want to do is I sort of say, thank you so much. I hope you have a great night. And I'm thinking, they just save me time. I love that
Totally.
people, I never fight. I never push anything I'm doing. I found in personal and in business relationships, anything you get only by pushing is always compromised. It's not a fit.
Totally. And one of the things that is so clear now that you mentioned like a background in advertising is the amount of, and whether I'm using this term in the right way or not, and I'll explain what I mean, is the amount of copywriting that's going on. Copywriting is how you get ideas from one brain to another brain.
Right.
Whether you're
Very well
using
put.
videos or words or faces or whatever it is that you're doing, that's the most important part. And it's so funny, in the whole course of learning magic, in the whole course of, making a website, all the different things that people do in their magic world, nobody is training us to put messages from my brain to your brain. That's the most important thing across the board. Teaching magic, performing magic, booking shows, everything. It's copywriting, and nobody's talking about it. So talk a little bit about whether it's copywriting or more, the overlap between like advertising and magic, and maybe what's kind of mentalities people can.
Well, we're talking about persuasive communication, and this is something that I've started to give public talks on, and people can go to sankeytalks.com. I'm doing more public speaking and corporate stuff around some of this really important stuff about being a persuasive communicator. And I think your point is right on. I would add one more thing to it, though, and that is that most choices, particularly regarding some sort of sale, are at least as driven by the emotion as they are by the idea. So, strong copywriting, first and foremost, is trying to inspire a certain collection of emotions, first and foremost, and often ideas can help with that. But one of my core ideas when it comes to communication is other people's imaginations can do more for your message than you ever can. They are your
Right.
greatest ally when performing magic or writing an email, is the imaginations of other people. When you appeal to that, there's an immediate relevancy. You're also letting their imaginations do the heavy work rather than trying to do all the work on your own. So I'm a big fan of communications that, while they're explicit, they always leave some room for their imagination to really
Right.
finish it up, to make it there. If you're trying to sell apples, you want to make sure that it's their apple, that's something that they create, they get involved in, and you inspire them to do that. So copywriting, first and foremost, it's about brevity. It's so much about brevity. For a very first thing you always have to do with everything you're doing, a website or writing or on the phone, is you have to get people's attention. Without that, you have nothing. And we
Mhm.
live in a culture where people's attention are being pulled 1,000 ways every minute. So, even if it's about going to a business meeting, and the problem with putting some pudding, chocolate pudding, all over your face and going into a business meeting is not so, because you immediately get everyone's attention and focus. You've succeeded in the most important thing. You got their attention. The problem is it's probably not on brand. It probably doesn't have
Mhm.
anything to do with what you're about to sell or pitch. So too many people don't put enough focus and energy, again, magicians included, in those first few moments about grabbing attention. Then you have the luxury of an extra couple of beats to sell something or to start to
Mhm.
create a mood. But so great copywriting is brief, it's emotionally engaging, you're using details in effective ways, but not too much. It's similar. We talk about magic, about, you don't support necessarily what's happening. You don't tell people I'm putting the coin in my hand, because you're
Mhm.
doubling up on communication, and it's a
Right.
waste. It's a waste. But on the other hand, you want to be using words, details, words that are powerful enough to take your pretty boring visual puzzle they've probably seen 1,000 times. It doesn't compare to the movie they were just watching, etc.
Mhm.
Trying to raise that dead ceremony of having someone pick a card. Don't tell me you're going to try to find it. I mean, if you can name a more predictable and empty ceremony in all of art, tell me what it is. I'm curious. And our job as real magicians, as real performers, of course, is trying to to raise this dead, meaningless thing to something that
Mhm.
actually engages and helps people feel things. I think it's high art. I think it's beautiful. And unfortunately, not enough magicians, I think, really focus on what to do with the trick rather than just nailing down the trick.
Really like what you're saying about, kind of trying to bridge that gap between a trick and, I always find myself speaking both very, very highly and very, very lowly about card tricks. Like sometimes I'm like, this is like the most amazing stuff. Like this is, we can like impact people. And the other part of me is like, yeah, I pick a card and I find it. Like what are we talking about here? So, but I like the way that you're saying that like it's our job to bridge the gap between what is a puzzle, what is like I know something you don't know, and raising that to a level of being emotional or impactful or communicative or just, whatever it is, and that bridging that gap is what makes it, art, and not just like, wow, great job knowing something that I don't. So I think that that was really good. And the other thing that you were mentioning about brevity, but also that you're trying to get attention and keep moving forward, is this idea that that I've heard a long, long time ago about advertising and about any sort of writing like that, which is that your first 3 seconds buys you 5 more seconds, which buys you 10 more seconds, which buys you a minute, which buys you 5 minutes, whatever. And that's the way you think about it when you're doing magic, or when you're writing. It's like the title buys you the subtitle, which buys you the first paragraph, and you can lose them at any point, and you have to make sure that they each feed into each other, and it's interesting, and it's not putting pudding on your face that it's so like far fetched that you can't make it from the heading to the subheading without changing gear. You know what I mean? So just that incremental step to win them from the very beginning all the way into the depths of it seems like it's a big part of it.
No, it's you so well put. The seconds, and you touched on, it's simple, but it's very difficult. The simplicity of
Hmm.
what we're talking about, it really is very simple in many ways. And one of the things you touched on is transitions. This is
Hmm.
where we lose people. Okay, so you got their attention, nicely done. You got it by staying on brand. Great. Unlike maybe a magician who tries to get people's attention by shouting, "There's a fire in the kitchen! Everybody, there's a fire in the kitchen!" So you
Yeah.
got everyone's attention, but you're way off brand and you're about to have a big problem. So let's say you got their attention, you're on brand with something you're selling or your magic, whatever. Now you start with something compelling, emotionally engaging, something they care about, something that ideally reflects an interest of theirs that they already brought into the space with them in some sense. Next up is transitions. You want to keep whatever you're doing, and this is the exact same with a close-up magic show. Where you're most likely to lose people is when you move from one trick to the other or one sales point to the other. So they need to really flow. That's why in the close-up in magic shows, we'll often have a through line. If you think pretty cool, but if you think that's amazing, just watch this. Even that's a through
Right.
line, let alone an emotional appeal. Now, your character can often be the through line in some sense. We know the old adage, and this applies to every bit to advertising as well. If they like you, you can do no wrong. If they don't like you, you can do no right. And it's totally
Hmm.
true. If you're the sort of magician who is likable and is being authentic as a person, and there's an obvious sense of a lack of arrogance, and that you truly care about the people in front of you, that can go a long way towards keeping their attention.
And I like what you were saying about transitions. That's something that is constantly an issue, and it's constantly overlooked by magicians. And you know it by just hearing the word in your head. And for my next trick, which is like, you should never say "and for my next trick" or "the next thing I'm going to show you" or "here's a puzzle." Like, none of that is a transition. That's I didn't write a transition, so
Nice.
now I have to go into this new thing like it's an introduction. So I think really making a distinction between transitions and introductions are really different, right? You get one introduction and everything else is a transition.
That's funny.
And I really like that. Let's change gears a bit and talk a little bit about magic on YouTube. I
I think it's a very
love
bad idea. You should never reveal the secret. Rule number one of magic is never reveal the secret. How people it's not sharing, it's not teaching, it's exposing. How dare people do that?
So I was going to talk about a different aspect of it first, but I was going to get to that. So let's just start with that. So many people are loud and angry about magic secrets being on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
For the sake of your knowledge, I'm all for it. I think people should teach magic on YouTube. And the caveat is that you shouldn't teach like if someone else is making money on their trick, you can't be like, "Here's how they actually do their trick." That really sucks. Other than that, unless you're exposing something that someone is like currently really trying to sell, or you're stealing, if you're not stealing, I am really, really for it. But I'd love to hear your approach as one of the 1A magic teachers on YouTube.
Okay. So let me say this for the record. Number one, I start with the premise that when I started putting magic stuff on YouTube and this and that, is the basic premise that I'm not thrilled with where magic is today. I'm not happy with the condescending and dismissive use the general public has of magic. I'm not thrilled with the fees we can charge. I'm not thrilled with the confusion between amateur magicians and real professional, veteran, experienced, inspired performers and etc. The way magic's mocked in the media and all this stuff. Now, if somebody is thrilled with where magic's at and feels it's empowered and positive and where it should be, that's cool. I'm not debating that. I'm just saying if I'm not happy where it's at, I figured out a long time ago or decided something had to change. Number one, fine. Also, notice that if nobody ever shared the secrets of magic, the psychology, the beautiful
Yes.
art form, the craft that with anybody else, obviously the art of magic would vanish in a generation. It wouldn't be around, it would be gone. So it's never the question, should the so-called secrets of magic, and usually people mean threads, wires, thumb tips. What they don't usually mean is, the far more important and valuable artistic stuff about the psychology, the philosophy, and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But if so the question isn't should it be revealed, or unless you want magic to die. It is how should it be revealed and where
Mhm.
should it be revealed. So that's very important for people to keep that in mind. Number two is words like revealed and exposed absolutely reflect what I would say is a negative attitude and can be very destructive to magic, because it sounds like you're just hiking up the skirt and showing people
Right.
quickly the thumb tip or the wire, playing all too keenly into the cliche and common thought that if they knew the secret, if they had the thumb tip, then they too could
Right.
be the magician. So I am against exposure. I am against revealing, even though I do use the languaging sometimes to pull eyes to what I do. Absolutely, I use much of the same. I use the myth to pull people in hopes that they leave with something they never expected to find.
Mm-hmm.
My third thing is, as for educating, I am all for I think the profound lack of education of people having some modicum of understanding of the differences between inspired performers and someone who grabbed a Visa card and bought a few things at the magic shop. Yeah, I think the big problem is a lack of education. Now, if I put a video up and talk about, the distinction between amateurs, no one will watch it. So it's not very effective. If, on the other hand, if I'm also sharing how to do a card trick, and the notion is that it's going to be quite easy for you to amaze your friend, which is an ego appeal, you'll be able to amaze and it won't take much work. Now, all of a sudden, I have a whole bunch of eyes coming in. And my job at that point is to be an educator, is to include in with the sugar, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote,
Spoon full of sugar. I was just gonna
some
say.
stuff that's I think, of real value and helping me progress my art in my own way. Is there an aspect of it that's mercantile and trying to pay my mortgage and stuff? Absolutely. I would not even begin to make an apology about that, because I'm assuming most of us are involved in that to some degree. It's again, it's not about making money. It's about what's your motive. If your only motivation is a sellout and an exposure and all that stuff. So magic on YouTube it can be. But again, 98% of the people on there are not educators. They don't have the
Mm-hmm.
experience. They don't have the life experience or performance experience. Do I begrudge them? Not at all. They're doing their thing. Because, when I was working with Chris Angel years ago and got a lot of flack, and then came to sort of a better understanding of what Chris's goals were and what he brought to the table and things, there were moments where I was very tempted to judge. And then after a while, I realized, Chris Angel is like Jay Sankey, is like you, is like anybody else. He's trying to make the most of whatever he's got. And so in that regard,
Mm-hmm.
I think amateurs judge. Amateurs get on chat rooms and they love to start talking about, is it art, and all these very, to me, naive distinctions. The real professional magicians, the pros, the people who are actually performing beautiful magic in the world, they're usually far too busy performing, or when they're not performing, they just want to watch a football game and have a drink. They're the
Mm-hmm.
real workers. So I'm not saying there isn't room for dialogue. I'm just saying that yeah, I think it's about education, and I'd be very curious. When I've raised this subject before with other magicians, most people do seem to, once they get past the provocative BS of the conversation, they do seem to understand. One other thing I want to mention about this, and this is really important, is that the magic, of course, is not about the thumb tip. And this is something that a lot of amateurs and even intermediate
Totally.
confuse. These are the brute tools we use to try to create an experience for people. The people with cheap exposure videos, the people who are threatened, the people who have the greatest to risk by cheap reveal and expose, are, if all you're bringing to your performance is the secret of the thumb tip, is the secret of the thread, then in my mind, you of course have everything to lose by these cheap exposure videos. And it may be, in a way, I kind of sometimes imagine a world where those kinds of the secrets of the technology really have no traction. People are not interested in them any more than they are in the new lens for a camera, where we've
Totally.
evolved to a point where everybody knows, well, yeah, still, but did you see what he did with it? It was an amazing, I've seen 15 guys use that same coin shell, but I don't even know if he used the shell. Maybe he did, maybe didn't. But all I know is how I felt when I watched. And magic's not there yet generally, but I think it
Mm-hmm.
might get there one way. And one way to do it would be to not to shake out the cheap Visa card magicians and call them out with cheap videos on YouTube, but I just believe that the whole thing is ultimately moving towards a positive thing for magic, not a negative
Mm-hmm.
thing at all.
First of all, I agree with all of it, and I find myself constantly being on this side of magic on YouTube and voicing a whole bunch of different concerns. And one of the thoughts that I always keep coming back back to is, people are talking about how like, oh, all the best magic is hidden in these books and is hidden in these old DVDs and all this different stuff. And people are learning on YouTube and they're just going to go and do horrible tricks. And then that's what they're going to do. And my two responses to that, and just to bring it, and sorry, not horrible tricks, but rather they're going to be only learning YouTube magic. That's all full of negative things for some reason. But my first thought is that it begins the rabbit hole. And that is what I think is the most important, is if you, for some reason, you went to see a magician and he did a card trick and now you're like, oh, and now you're searching like card trick where card comes back to the top over and over again. Like that is the 0.005% of people who are doing it. And the guy is looking at it because he is on his road to start learning magic. Even if the first trick he watches is some no-name guy who's horrible at magic doing a really lame trick sitting in front of his camera where you can just see his hands and it doesn't make any sense, then he'll click on another video and he'll keep going down the rabbit hole, or he'll be like, magic's boring. And the same way that people bought magic stuff at magic stores, people went to the library to see if there were magic books, the same way that anybody who was interested seeked it before, YouTube is the library of now. So I'm always really like struggling when people are talking about, that there's so much bad magic on YouTube. And I said, yeah, and there's so much bad magic in writing, and there's so much bad magic on DVDs.
Well, and there's so much bad music on YouTube, and there's so much bad this, but it definitely has made the challenge. And this is more of a comment about the media world we live in now than just magic and YouTube. Is maybe there is that argument, I'm sure you've heard before, that in some regards, ironically, it might be harder than ever to find the good stuff.
Totally. One of the things that I'm always preaching is when someone is angry about the quality of magic on YouTube, my instinct is you need to drown them out. You need to be a better teacher, right? Like people are clearly searching on YouTube. How do I do magic tricks? How do I make a card? How do I make this? People are searching for it. And if you don't like the quality of what other people are doing on YouTube, then make your own and teach people to do it. And like you said, a lot of the magic is the lesson, which is the spoonful of, medicine. And it's our job to make a video that says like, a magic trick exposed. And then it says like, here's how to do a trick. And also remember, blah, 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 whatever that important note is. And I think nobody is going to learn quickly on YouTube and then become an all-star magician with average magic tricks. To be great, like you said, to be great, you have to know the real secrets of magic, which is performing and scripting and writing and doing it a million times and, listening to your audience and all these different things that don't come from finding out the tools. No one is angry that you can find out what lens the photographer is using. You still have to take a bajillion photos to be good at taking photos. Like there's no way around that.
And all the bad magic that is on YouTube is one of the reasons several years ago that I thought, well, if there's going to be crappy magic on YouTube, then I want to be somebody who, as humbly as I can, and I'm certainly under no illusion that people watch my videos and they're filled with nothing but genius comments. I mean or genius insights. I'm the last person who would ever try to convince anybody I'm some sort of brilliant teacher of magic. But I do know that I know better than anybody else. I know the authenticity of my attempts to try to, like we were saying, is first, I want to be effective. So I am not going to just focus on intermediate, advanced level, relatively dry psychology principles of magic that really can make or break you once you get there. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to try to be effective and pull eyes in, and then try to balance out in my own small way some place, a handful of videos people can watch that bring a certain degree of insight and experience to the subject, while many others maybe are not. I just want to do what I can to balance out in some small way a lot of the stuff that's maybe not as positive for magic.
And part of it comes down to like bettering magic in general, which is the way that you started when you were talking about this and how you weren't really happy with the state of magic. And I like to think of your YouTube channel as welcoming people to magic with ginormous open arms and bringing them in. And when people ask me about learning magic, I straight up tell them to look up your videos for two reasons. The first is it's stuff that is for the beginner intermediate level so that they can actually learn it. And the second is if they don't like you teaching magic, then they're not going to like sitting and reading books for 10 hours, or they're not going to like, they're not going to like watching Steve Forty videos. If they don't find that at least interesting or entertaining, then magic is probably not for them.
Funny. Well, that's very good. That's a very gracious thing to say. I appreciate that. Yeah, aren't you a nice guy? Thanks, man.
And I mean it very seriously. And I think that one of the things that we have to think about in terms of exposure is starting points. I'm always for, making the ramp up into magic as smooth as possible. And if they can learn one trick that can make them feel great for 6 months before they start learning the second and third, like, you want a little win. It's the same thing in business and in advertising and, all that stuff. Like, if you can get the people at home to have some little win, maybe they learned something from your advertising copy, or maybe they took a piece of advice in one of the emails and they put action into it and it worked and they booked a gig, whatever it is, if they can get a little win from magic or from the learning, then they're going to go back to it and they're going to.
Well, now you're talking like a real teacher. I can hear that, and your passion for new people learning something to have, like you said, a little win, and your understanding of the enormous importance of that. Because that's really it can be very decisive, because there are people who have a little win and they still don't want to go any deeper into magic, which is great because they're basing it on at least a win. And it's like, oh, that was fun. But then those who, it's so much comes down to, what's your relationship to the notion of fooling people? And the ironic thing is, if all you want to focus on is the fool, then you and I both have had situations, and you've done it as a teacher, where you just carefully and explicitly sort of demonstrated the secret technique to something, then showed it to the same very engaged and attentive person, and fooled them the second time with it. Mm-hmm. So my attitude would be is, if you think if YouTube videos are a threat to what you do, then you really need to ask yourself, what are you bringing to these tricks? What exactly are you bringing to these tricks? Now, for those though, I can appreciate those. If someone doesn't want to use magic as a way to connect with people or share themselves, their unique view on the world, to entertain people, really, if what they're looking for is, and I don't mean it in a evaluative, judgmental way, I'm going to use the word cheap. It sounds, or how about a fleeting bit of optics? If that's all you want to do with your tricks, and a popular YouTube video is revealing the mechanics behind that fleeting bit of optics, I do sincerely appreciate why you'd take exception with them, for sure, because that is going to it's going to undermine what you wanted to do with the thumb tip that day. I get that. But for magic to move forward as an art form, I mean, you and I know the history of magic and the history of cinema are very closely related. And, people used to, I forget the early film days though, but, people would watch a video of a train rushing towards the screen and they duck in the cinema. They'd actually step back, go, oh my God. And we're so still at an adolescent stage, and even younger in magic, where we're so impressed and intrigued with the techniques, with the gadgetry, the gadgets, that as the notion of, well, what really matters, if you want to talk about the so-called art, and of course it's always the people who are most have the greatest doubts about their artistry that want to really talk about, is it an art or not, is the it's what you do. If you don't see the thumb tip as a means to an end, or the thread as a means to an end, I don't criticize you, but I don't think you should be talking about magic as an art.
It's a tool or
yeah,
whatever.
It's just a brute piece of whatever. It's nothing. It's nothing. It's an opportunity. A thumb tip is an opportunity, and you can make of it as little or much as you want.
Someone had told me a story about, he brought a thumb tip with him. It's the only trick he knows. And then he was on a trip to some country where he didn't speak the language, and he did a trick with a thumb tip and a leaf, and all these kids loved it. And I'm like, you know what? I don't think exposure and magic is going to have any problem with that. I don't think that's going to change it. And also, just to make a note about the other side of the argument, I obviously do see that there's negatives that someone could just look up your trick, even if you do add to it.
And you're raising the important question of the how versus the why and the who. And as long as magicians, it's a, what do they call it? It's a chicken and egg situation. As long as the society in general is obsessed only with the how of the trick, then a lot of magicians are going to have a hard time getting off that. And as long as magicians are only focused on presenting stuff with a focus on the how, then the audience is, so somebody's got to, for magic to move forward, for us to make more money, and for magic to be seen, and I think in a wider range of people understanding there are brilliant magicians and chitty magicians and all this kind of thing. I think it's really important that we move more and more from the brute how of it and to the why. My mind goes to making a rabbit out of a handkerchief, and I've never fooled anybody when I briefly grab a napkin and make a bunny out of it with the ears and this and that.
Yeah.
But every time I do it, as soon as I go to my pocket for some invisible snack and the bunny's eating it for a second, there's a moment. And now, is that magic? Is it magic when you go into the art gallery in Italy and you see a Michelangelo and there's something about the presence of the piece or this sense that at any moment it could stand up that defies
Mhm.
explanation? Is that magic? And so, we can certainly have a discussion of what and I think the word is used pretty narrowly much of the time these days, mostly just to sell
Mhm.
different kinds of detergent.
My feeling about the word magic is the limit to the English language allows people to just keep using that word for so many different reasons that it's so hard to say. People are like, "Oh, a first kiss is
Right.
magic," but so is also a coin vanish. I'm
Sure.
like, "Well, I don't know. Like, they're both similar in a
Right.
way, but I think we need richer vocabulary to explain these
However,
things."
however, when you're kissing a coin, it's still inexplicable, but I wouldn't call that
That's
magic.
true. That's true. um, so that's great. The position of magic on YouTube is not only one to help magic move forward, and also to help people, at their first stages in magic, but it's also to sort of combat where magic is right now, and something, whatever it is that made us get so deep into the tricks. Just buy more tricks. That'll do it. Like another secret, finding a way to combat that and help give a little bit of medicine with the honey, is really great. And it's good to know that it's not just, obviously I knew it before, but it's good to share that, this isn't like exposure video so that a million people can watch it and be like, yes, right? But it's like exposure video so that a million people can be more interested in magic, and hopefully not, or rather a million people that were interested in magic can discover this and not some other nonsense, and not continue being interested, or whatever the case
Yeah,
may be.
and I gotta say, boy, you got a sparkling mind there. You did a great summation of it. I should also throw in there too. I have enormous passion for teaching. I love to
Hmm.
teach. And I think it's a bunch of elements, including standing up in people and yattering about something I think I know something about. I'm sure there's some ego and attention and all that stuff as a performer. I also just, when I have these moments, both again, whether I'm giving a public, sort of a corporate talk along one lines, a communication or authenticity, how to access your authentic creativity and all this other stuff I do on one side, or talking to a group of magicians. I just when you feel these click moments, when you see people inspired by what you're saying and you're sharing your hard-earned knowledge, I'd never really feel. I try to model a whole bunch of things for my children, which are really so much of my decisions I make with them very much in mind. One of the things I'm not good at modeling for them is taking, this notion of my achievements and taking credit. I'm not. I wish I were a bit better at that, because I hope they'll be better at than I am, that they can enjoy some of their achievements. So it's not an ego thing, but I just feel like such a fortune. It's such a privilege to be a conduit, to be able to share a bit of perspective on something and
Totally.
see it land in people, and they get something of value from it. It is so goddamn humbling. I'm just very. It feels like an enormous privilege to, on top of everything else I've been given, to be able to have these opportunities that come my way.
And it's also a choice. I think about coaches in sports, and specific sports. Some of them this is the same, and some of them it's not, but there's specific sports where, like, that coach had to make a decision at a very young age that he didn't want to become a weightlifter, but instead he wanted to train the best
Right.
weightlifters and teach, because it's not only that he can lift weights, but that his extra bit of oomph, his talent, his factor is that he's an incredible teacher. Like, that is the gift that he can spread to the world. Like, that's the gift. And the idea that, you get to mix your magic and your other thing. And if that thing is teaching, then boy, is that amazing. And boy, is the 2019 world ripe for you to teach magic and to share magic. That's why this podcast exists. We're moving forward as a people, as a generation. Teaching and learning is freer, it's cheaper, it's easier. And I'm all for it. And I want to keep being for it. And I want to push anybody who is thinking about teaching or sharing knowledge towards doing
Yeah, and
that.
so this whole notion, anybody who begrudges somebody else that they've been able to get something that they never got, or they got it easy or whatever, like magic aside, teaching aside, just getting down to grassroots as a human. you got to lose the
Mhm.
begrudge thing. There's so many things that I've learned as I get a little bit older that, I'm lucky because I'm aware of what's going on inside my chest and my mind. And, I'm not above jealousy. I'm not above judgment in the least. But what's happening, I find, is that I'm more aware of this little needle that pops up, this gauge, and I see it and I go, oh, okay. I bet I wonder. I bet I can imagine why you might begrudge that or judge that, and that makes sense. That makes sense. I have empathy for that. I can see where that's coming. You come by it honestly. Do not, though, give it the wheel of the car. Don't let it be aware of it. You don't have to, quote unquote, actively change and improve yourself. I find in life, just being gently aware is more than enough to inspire certain shifts. So anybody who's got some begrudgment going around anything, I sincerely feel for you, and you need to take responsibility for that and understand that that's not helping you or anybody else.
One of the things I like to say is, if something's like troubling you like that, you say, "Here, you have 5 minutes to be angry. Go ahead, be angry." And then you get to stop being angry because, like it only tolls on you to be angry about someone else's, to be jealous about
Oh
someone. Like,
yeah.
like they don't get better slower because you're jealous, right? Bad things don't happen to them because every time you see their ad, you're like, screw them. None of that happens, and it's only bothering you. It's only infecting your own brain to feel so negatively. So I really, really like that. Let's change gears a little bit and talk about creating magic. Before we started recording, we were talking about some accolades, and one of them you brought up is the unofficial award for the most magic tricks ever created, which it's only Guinness's problem that it's not an official award. But it really is crazy, not only the amount that you've created, but also the quality of magic that you've created. The fact that I can get one of your books and also watch your YouTube videos, and there's literally no overlap is unbelievable. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, if someone watches your stuff and they're like, man, I just find myself doing other people's tricks and I cannot come up with anything smart for the life of me, what kind of advice do you have for someone who wants to create magic?
Hmm. The first thing I'd say is, regarding my experience creating, is it's a discipline, it's a habit. It's a habit that can be built. And, you know, there's a bunch of different things I sort of touch on with some of my seminars around creativity and things like that. But certainly it starts with honoring your ideas. It starts with just daring to say to yourself, forget about good, bad, wrong, right, whatever. My relationship with my kids is amazing because I don't think of my kids as better than anybody else or worse than anybody else. But at the same time, they're pure magic to me, and I'm humbled by them, and I'm going to serve them out of love. And in the same way, it's about developing a relationship to your own ideas where you say, the heck with it. It's not about better than this person's ideas. These are mine, mine. These are mine. They're in my head. I'm going to scribble them down. And so, first thing to do would be to literally have a piece of paper or a small notebook. You can use modern tech, of course, if that's more your thing. That's cool. I really love paper. I love that I can sketch and draw and that it can't die. I don't need to make sure it's powered. And I also find the tactile relationship with markers and pens and paper. I really love the tactile element. Of course, both the olfactory and the tactile basically do not exist online. It's a dead world. Two of our most important senses not represented. So I think it's about daring to, first and foremost, give yourself permission. So a notebook, pen and paper, have it with you. That's a huge, huge deal. I've had students and fans adopt that, and it's amazing how almost like magic, a page gets filled with some notes, a thought. Ambitious card is like taking the elevator. Wonderful. Don't judge it. Perfect. I would like to do a coin trick where the coin ends up in my shoe. That's it. Anybody who wants to judge that as less than anybody else's ideas is got it all wrong. So, and I find from that kernel, that approach of just being humble enough to say, these are my ideas. These are just some thoughts I have. Scribbling them down is great. The next step would be making a little bit more, not a pressure, but making a bit of a routine of it, a bit of a discipline where maybe Saturday afternoons, somewhere between doing the laundry and going off to soccer, whatever, you try to set aside a bit of time just to review your thoughts, not to improve, not to polish. All that languaging, one of the seminars I give is called Stop Trying to Be Creative. because we have so many of these highfalutin ideas of the artist and the mystery of creativity. And it's just not that way for so many people who create a lot of stuff. So, give yourself that opportunity. Don't set yourself up on a pedestal, and start putting in a little bit of time. And from there, I'd say the relationship between you and your creativity usually starts to become a more personal and unique thing. I really encourage my students to focus on exploring, not creating, just explore. Anybody can explore. Anybody can think about a thing for a couple of beats and see what comes up, and you explore and you jot down what you find. That's it. It's a discovery. It's not about having to so-called create. So those would be a first. The one other thing I'd say is, take a break from watching. Choose the people you want to be inspired by in magic, your influences, your primary teachers. Choose them very, very carefully, and then stick with those two or three, and don't look at other people's stuff beyond your prime handful, because you're just overwhelming yourself, and I think putting a cork in your own thinking.
Totally. There's a few things I want to touch on about that. The first is that you were talking about setting aside time, which I think for me is like super, super critical. But you should set aside time if you're struggling with creativity. If every time you sit down, you come up with all these ideas and you fill your notebook, you're good. You start executing on the notebook. But if you're someone who's like, I'm just not creative, then you need to be more diligent about it. Like you just said, you need to be like, every Monday from this time to this time is when I'm creative, is when I'm going to sit and fill a page and a half of ideas. I really, really like that. One of the things that I'd like to know your opinion on about it is sometimes when you talk about creativity, people say something like this. They say, why should I try to come up with a better version of Triumph? There is the best version out there already, and my version is weaker. Hundreds of magicians have worked on this problem, and they've come up with the most brilliant of presentations. Who am I to say, I'm shuffling the cards face up and face down? It reminds me of how scrambled my brain is. And, it feels like a step down from how amazing everything is right now. Is it worth it? Shouldn't I just do the amazing thing? What would you say to that?
Well, okay, there's a couple things. First, the people who create a lot of stuff, they have to create a lot of stuff. That's just who they are. Okay. They're a natural. They have a relationship with the act of creation, that they're addicted, or it's about a self-esteem issue. And I'm talking about myself. I don't see myself as outside these issues as well. A natural comedian compared to somebody who learns to be funny on stage, learns the craft, they're night and day. They really are. And a teacher tries to bridge the gap to some degree, but it should be noted that the more common tools towards creativity are likely not going to result in a Stephen King kind of output or relationship to your work. So that's really important to know. There is a difference, I believe, in those things. Now, as for this notion of comparison and better, why have a kid? Because the kid's probably not going to be this smart. Why have a kid? Because even if he gets into sports, he probably won't outshoot this NBA thing. No, you have to shift your relationship. It's all about, you have to shift your relationship perspective on creating. You create because they're yours, because you want to explore you. It's for you. It's not about a better Triumph. I've never sat down and thought to myself, how can I have some tricks that obviously are quite similar to other tricks people have created, but they definitely didn't start with me looking at it and saying, okay, what was missing from his? What can I do? No. Quite the opposite. So I can see how someone would say, it's not going to be as good. And you know what? If what you're trying to do, if your goal is to perform the best magic you can possibly perform, then maybe just be that humble student who looks through what you can find in the world and pick and choose and find whatever works best for you, perform those. There's obviously nothing wrong with that. It's not the same as creating and exploring yourself, your own stuff. So they're night and day. It's a false comparison, and it won't get you anywhere. Comparisons in general make you blind to the beauty of both things. The older I get, and I hear people near me, and people are very tempted to compare this and compare that, and I hear more and more blindness in that whole process.
One of the things that you touched on there, which I think is so critical, and it's something that, I'm constantly reminding myself of this, is that your own is better than better, right? Like coming up with something that is you, your own, yours, you came up with it. It's your thing. You like it's better. It feels better. It is better. It's better for you. It's better for, when you look back on 10 years worth of stuff, what you've accomplished, that's better. Like just having your thing and doing it your way is better because of that, right? That's all that it takes. So I think that that's really critical, particularly if you find yourself taking magic somewhat seriously. I think that that is so critical. Is like the you is better than better, and that's something that as a performer, very only in the last few years I became, a full-time performer, and that's a lesson that's slowly been permeating my brain, which is like, what is the good of doing someone else's act, even if I bought it, even if I think I couldn't possibly improve upon it? Like, for what purpose am I doing that? The whole you versus better is something that really, really motivated me. And something else that you touched on is talking about evaluating who you're consuming from. And not only in magic is it a big it's a big issue. There's unlimited magic being released every single day. There's unlimited. So you can't keep fresh on everything always. There's not enough time in the world. You couldn't possibly do it. But more importantly, and just another way to put this in perspective, is I like to think about the seesaw, the teeter-totter of creating versus consuming. And you start to say, like, if I only have 100 units of creating versus consuming, how much of my time is spent consuming and how much of my time is spent creating? Do I spend 80% of my time watching videos and buying tricks and then 20% of my time working on them? Or am I spending 80% of my time working on these tricks and 20% of the time discovering new stuff? And you have to decide, am I going to listen to what someone else is saying, or am I going to make what I'm going to say? And I think that is something that people who are struggling with creativity can really
Yeah, and what I'm hearing and what you're saying, and again, it could be more about my ears than your words, is it seems to me that you have the idea of performing one's own stuff on a little bit of a pedestal. No criticism intended on my side. I certainly really like to do the same. I wouldn't want anybody listening to this to think for a second, in my view at least, I mean, doing a paint by numbers, doing a paint by numbers is, I think, a beautiful and wonderful and great thing for some people, for many people to do. The outline's there and you fill in the colors, and when it's done, there it is, and you hang it up and it's done. And obviously you don't call it necessarily your own original creation, and obviously you don't there's things it is and things that it isn't. I just really think that I certainly hope that, I would hate to think that many of my fans feel any obligation or any pressure to do anything more other than to, if there's a trick of mine they like, to try it out and use my presentation if you want, and have some fun with it, full stop. I honestly, as much as I want to see the people's view of magic to continue to shift and be more flexible, and I think more comprehensive in the different kinds of magic there are and performers and things, I personally, I know most of my fans have no interest in using magic as a means to express their artistic self, and I have no problem with that. It can just be fun to be used like a wind-up toy too. I've got, I think it's just about where I'm concerned with this. If there is a student of mine or somebody, or if I am giving a seminar and these are people who want to bring more of their creativity to what they do and make it more original and more their own, well, then I'm very passionate about trying to provide some guidance and some suggestions in that regard.
I totally agree. There's two things I want to touch on that you were just saying. The first is about doing other people's effect, and totally, I don't want anyone to misconstrue what I'm saying as to saying that you have to create. Particularly, I am somebody who struggles with creating so much that, like, I rarely create my own methods. I don't think I'm clever enough. I use other people's methods. I come up with my own presentations, but that's because that's for me, and that's really fun. And just to put in perspective, you ever seen one of your friends posting on Instagram? They went to one of those paint nights and everyone painted the exact same photo, but they all look fantastic and they all learned how to do it, and they still put it up in their house and it still looks great. And that's what the paint by numbers thing reminds me of. And there is no issue with it. And another example is I was just at Magi Fest last weekend, which was fantastic, and I met an incredible magician. He was 13 years old. His name is Andrew DeGraff, and he was doing incredible magic. And not only was he doing people's tricks verbatim, but that was on purpose. He did Guy Hollingworth's Torn and Restored card for Guy Hollingworth with his presentation and with his words. And that was the first time that I saw that as being incredible, respectful, positive, like it was like, wow, look at the way that you did this correctly, verbatim, and whether it was to show, to showcase it at the convention, or whether it was just, to be able to do it the way that it's written, there's nothing wrong with it. And there is incredible value and glory as to doing an effect as it is written, as it is described, saying the same words that Vernon said 60 years ago or whatever, right? Like there is so much value to that, to saying like, I am doing Jay Sankey's trick. That's so cool. It's cool. David Copperfield does your trick. That's cool. He didn't have to invent his own trick. So no, I'm not saying that that everybody has to be creative. All I was saying is, as a performer, and especially as a full-time entertainer, there is definitely something to be said about adding you to it. Like you were saying, if all you're doing is the trick as it was taught on YouTube, then you might fall into some struggles, and also you might struggle to showcase who you are or be unique. Or something like
and
that.
to add another little side to that same prism we're kind of exploring together here is this notion too that imagine an actor saying, yeah, I was in a Shakespearean play last year and did a certain soliloquy, and someone asked, did you do it verbatim, or did you mess around with it? And, in the theater
Right.
community, of course, they understand fully that you can wear the same costume, say the same words, stand on the stage, same relationships to the other actors and things, and either one, do a great job of it, enjoy doing it, full stop, or two, bring enormous creativity still while being verbatim all over the place. So from a creative perspective, there's so much you can do with something that's considered hack, if you want. On from another side is that, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people I know people who are really very creative, and they're interested. Too, I don't have creativity, and it's on being on the inside of something, and maybe you can relate to this. When I think about, if anybody in the world understands the limits, um, if anybody's going to be unimpressed with the act of churning out hundreds of tricks, it's going to be me. I don't wake up in the morning feeling great about myself. I'd be much more interested and find more interesting to look at what is this, a cry for help? What's going on here? I'm a very driven person. So what's pushing me? I'm happy. Have no problem bringing the conversation around to warts and all, more skeptical, more, it has nothing to do. I'm the last person who is impressed with quantity, and the whole quantity quality
Mm-hmm.
issue and all that kind of thing. I'm just somebody who's just, I have these voices in my head, these things kind of, we were talking here, and I wrote down the word goallessness at one point, and I'm looking at the word goallessness, and I think goalie, and I think, wouldn't it be cool in the World Cup, some guy kicks a soccer ball, the goalie jumps, and the next thing we know, we see it's basically stuck in his stomach. It's only sticking halfway out of his jersey. The ball is somehow penetrated and stuck in his chest or his stomach, and I'm thinking about methods and sight lines and something maybe behind his back. Maybe it's actually a balloon to deflate the original soccer ball. Where can you hide a soccer ball? Black art with the green grass and maybe the. So this is just the way
Mm-hmm.
my brain, my poor brain, early on, I forced it and tied it with duct tape in funny shapes. So it was, and for years I couldn't barely sleep. Just ideas after the magic perspective. And so maybe about 15 years ago, I actively, because I had things going on and wanted to start a family and got into stand-up comedy, I had to actively push the chair back and tell my brain slowly, stop frickin' thinking about the magic for a bit. And I definitely slowed down how much I churned out. And so hopefully something I just said there with verbs and nouns made some sense.
Totally. And one of the things which you said earlier, which you sort
I'm
of
sure
said
I did.
again, which I want to touch on, is this idea of having fun. And I know this always feels like a sixth grade talent show when I talk about that. The whole point of it is to have fun. But we all got into magic for different reasons and through different things. I touched on it at the beginning when I talked about why I ask people about how they got into magic, and how it seems to always quite clearly play a role in the type of magic and the way they do magic. But the real highlight of that is we're all in magic because a different part of it made us giddy. Some of us it was because we really liked just coming up with the trick. Some of us it was because we really liked just performing magic, like just standing up there in front of the people and doing the magic. Some of us like looking at a trick and doing it verbatim and coming up with the one move that we think can make it a little bit better. Some people like challenging sleight of hand. Again, not to sound like a sixth grade talent show, but enjoy what you're doing, pick the part that you want to do and do it. And one of the things that was clear when you were talking about that goalie and the ball and whatever was going on is that you like creating magic. You love that stuff, comes to you naturally. And when you think about things, it slowly spirals into the magic trick and the magic effect. When I think of things, that's not what it spirals into. It spirals into different things about magic. Maybe the thing that I'm going to say on stage, or, oh, that is a really great line. Let me use that on stage and not just in my whatever. Like, I spiral in different directions, and we all go down our own rabbit holes about different things. So my piece of advice about creating magic is find the way that you create, or find the way that you do magic, or add to magic, or do something with magic. And if that's, I bring around a thumb tip with me, and I like to do it when I meet people that speak other language, great, good for you, hope that's great. I want to do magic so that I can, whatever it is, if you want to write scripts, if you want to, not only can you do that, but there's so much richness in magic that you could help someone do that for them, right? You could write scripts for Copperfield. Like, that's a real job that you could have. All of these different things, you can do the thing that you like about magic almost exclusively and make a career out of it. So my advice is not that there is one way to create, but rather, like, find the way that you like to create, and then take up on the advice you were saying about, setting aside that time and creating. And it works like magic. Like you said, you start, there's an empty piece of paper, you start writing ideas down, and then it's a full-fledged thing, and you bring it into reality, and then look, you came up with something. So the first of the wrap-up questions is the endless chain. So in order for the podcast to go on for eternity, we like each guest to recommend another guest that we absolutely have to have on the podcast. So who is someone who we super, super have to have? And you can name a few people, because we might have some.
There's two people that come to mind immediately for me. Well, I'm going to give you three, and you probably interviewed one or two or three of them. First, for sure, Richard Sanders. He may not be easy to get him to nail him down. He's a bit of a funny duck that way, but he's hilarious. He's insightful. He's a true experienced performer and creator. So Richard Sanders for sure. Next, very similar for all the same reasons, David Acker, another old friend of mine, a real worker, hilarious. He'll give you an amazing interview for sure. And third, kind of quirky left field, a guy I haven't had a chance to spend as much time with in the last few years as I would have liked to, but a dear friend of mine and a very interesting thinker around magic and what is magic would be Mike Scott.
Oh, great. All three of those are people that have not been on yet, but I will say two of the three of them are people that is in the works already. So very excited, and hopefully if people are pumped about that, that's good news. The next thing is something about magic in 2018, 2019 that you like, and something about magic in 2018, 2019 that you don't
like and don't like. I like the fact that we're being exposed to more interesting personalities, that the representatives of magic, while I still find are pretty narrow in a lot of ways, they still stick closely. I mean, a lot of magicians still emphasize the puzzle, the mystery, the how of it, not so much the why or who they are. And they've got a 4-minute TV spot, and they just want to wow people. I do think that the diversity of the personalities, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's religion, we're seeing a greater diversity, I think, more than ever. And I think that is freaking awesome. I think that's key. I think it's key. So I love that.
I love that.
As for what I don't like so much is we now live in such a culture where everything is so stylized, and anybody with a camera and this and that. And I'm heading into something I'm sure you're very familiar with that people talk about is, the magic only for the camera stuff. And I'm not talking about showing skill, the different cool things you can do, whether it's flourishing, whether it's whatever it is. Obviously, in my opinion, it's wonderful that there are more means to share that and videotape that and send that out into the world than ever before. I think that's awesome. I'm talking about stuff presented as magic that actually is, obviously, it's stooges, it's camera tricks, it's rig props, it's all this stuff. The fact that it's being compared or put in the same group with this stuff that's I'd call more honest, more organic, less media required. I think that confusion between those two is not a good thing ultimately for magic.
I love it. I think that's great. The last part, and then I will let you go. But the very last part is both of us, you and I, mention one thing about the episode that we thought was particularly important. People have been listening for over an hour now, and we've touched on so many different areas of magic. So this is sort of a take-home point. So if they can find one thing from the episode that was particularly relevant for me, what I really, really liked is the overlap of copywriting and advertising and magic. And to me, that was really cool, and particularly, you know, taking some of those ideas where you were talking about advertising, but it was all so clearly about magic, and the other way around as well, where it's like, you're learning how important it is to get their attention. That 3 seconds buys 5 seconds buys 10 seconds. Making sure that if you get their attention, it's not with something totally crazy, and then it's impossible to reel them back into the right topic. So that stuff was really interesting, and I think it's great starting points for people who are creating and working on their own presentations to be like, I have to start with getting their attention. It has to make enough sense to bring people a part of it. It has to trigger their emotions. Like, those are actual tools in copywriting. Like, in any copywriting book, they mention all of those things. So to me, that was a real, real highlight for me. Jay, what was
Well,
a big
first I
highlight
want to
for
say
you?
that's very cool that's what some of the stuff that resonated with you at this moment, because I'm actually putting the finishing touches on a sort of a project focusing on persuasive communication, sort of 34 really core ideas about that. And I'm going to be releasing it as a book as well as a sort of a handbook and seminars and podcasts. Going to be doing a crowd share kind of approach and towards my fan base. So that's
Fantastic.
funny. That's cool that's something that's really resonating with you, that overlap. That's something I'm very excited to share a lot more of my insights on that with my fans. In addition to that, the part that really resonates with me in this moment is you and I both expressed a passion for people finding and following their own joy in magic, to not get caught up in the notion that you have to create or you have to do this or you can't use the same presentation as somebody else, and just basically to follow your joy, and that we all got into it for joyful, goal-free reasons, and that is doesn't need to be justified, and that you can just have your own version of fun with magic, and that's more than enough, and that you and I both believe in that fervently. I think that's cool.
And I think anybody who listened to this in hopes that they were going to find like the number one secret to being the most creative person in magic, I hope that they leave it with a little bit of a change in perspective, which is to maybe look a little bit more inward and say, what is the thing that you like to do in magic, and how can you finagle your life? How can you structure your life to do more of that and get to do more of that and use that to your benefit? So I really, really like that.
Yeah, we each of us is doomed to be ourselves, and we may as well embrace and
Mhm.
celebrate and rock that, because no one else is gonna.
I love that. And the very last thing is plugs. So we spoke a little bit about your YouTube channel, Sankey Magic. Where else should people go if they want to learn more about
Let's see.
everything
They
that
can
you're doing?
definitely they can follow me on Instagram at the real J Sankey. I share it's kind of a different slices of me than I've shared before, including a lot of insight.
By the way,
Please.
just to interject, I know that you only very recently, maybe in the last year or whatever, got on Instagram, but I will say it's some really, really great content. So I'm a big fan of it, and I think people should go because
Oh,
there's some
thanks,
pretty
man.
cool stuff
Yeah,
on
yeah.
there.
I sort of let my freak flag I think fly a bit more there, which is cool. And you can definitely, of course, on YouTube, it's the Sankey Magic channel. And then finally, you'll find sort of I'm doing more of this now. You can check out sankeytalks.com. It's sort of a showcase of some of my public speaking stuff and some of the topics. So anybody who's listening, who maybe is in a corporation or a company looking for an interesting speaker, a different take on things, you'll certainly find some information at sankeytalks.com. And I think that ought to do it.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. And before I let you go, I just want to say thank you because your videos, your, everything like all anytime, anywhere, restaurant work, like all that different stuff are the things that got me into magic and got me playing with a deck of cards. And you were in those first few phases and steps for me to really get me in there. So really, really awesome to get a chance to now chat with you about some topics
Oh,
that really excite me. So thank you so
aren't
much
you a
for.
sweet guy? I really appreciate that positivity. Thank you so much, man. And for you to take the time, we both know we're mortal. We talked about not living forever. For you to take the time this afternoon and ask and speak with me in such candor and be a good listener and all that, you really gift me. So thank you so much for that, Jonah. I appreciate it.
The pleasure was all mine. And once again, a thank you to you and a thank you to everybody at home who tuned in for now an hour and a bit to be a part and listening to us talk magic. And hopefully you all learned something. And we will see you all next Thursday. Well, there you go. I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you take away from this episode not only a little bit about how to be creative, setting aside some time and filling up a page, but also take a moment to think about what it is about magic that got you into it, and what it is about magic that when you do to this day, it makes you feel giddy and you really, really enjoy it, and find a way to maximize that, because that's how you're going to really, really grow, and that's how you're going to really, really enjoy this art. Once again, thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you next Thursday.